Welcome back, everyone. This is Chase, and joining me today is Clare Pavelka, the corporate historian for Red Wing Shoe Company. Thanks for joining me.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. It's been fun. We've gone back and forth over the last month or two, or maybe longer, talking about corporate archives and the work that you're doing and the work that we're doing here on campus. And I thought it would be great to have you on as a part of our History of Gear series that we've been putting together to talk a little bit about the archives at Red Wing. And it's been interesting. We talked a little off air a little bit about the difference that we're starting to see in the different archives in the industry and how corporate archives are run at different organizations. So I'm assuming that'll be no different. That'll no different, but different, right? At Red Wing, I'm sure things are done a little differently there.
Right.
But I guess
and by the way, Chase, I very much enjoyed listening to all these archivists and also people in the industry. So I have been letting lots of people know in my organization, you got to check out this podcast. So it's been a lot of fun. So I've listened to a lot of episodes.
I appreciate that. I'm really passionate about this and passionate about looking into the past and learning about, what that can help us. I don't know what that can do to help companies into the future. I'm kind of a self-proclaimed historian, I guess, in that sense. I've always had a passion for it and an interest. And now that I work in the industry, I just think there's so much work to be done to preserve and protect and share the history of great brands in the industry. And we're lucky to have so many great brands in this industry. And the couple that we'll talk about in the archive that you're a part of, we were going to touch a little bit on Red Wing, but Red Wing is obviously that's the core brand, but there's some other brands that are attached to that you work with as a part of your larger archive. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
No, absolutely. So Red Wing Shoe Company has a family of brands. The Red Wing brand being one of them, Vasque being another, Irish Setter, Works. We also own a tannery that provides a lot of our raw materials for our footwear. And we also own a hotel, which is a little outside of the loop on those other brands. But we own a historic hotel that is right across from our corporate office. And we can get into that a little bit later when we talk about our collection. But we have that in our family of brands because the family, who is the primary shareholder of Red Wing Shoe Company, we're privately owned, has taken a great interest in the community. And this historic hotel is in Red Wing, and it predates the Red Wing Shoe Company. And they basically rescued this hotel and has completely refurbished it, and it's been a great challenge and a great asset to the overall collection.
Well, that tells me a lot about I guess why we'll get into this certainly, but that just tells me a lot about why Red Wing has an archive in the first place. Like it seems like from the top down, there's a focus on community around preserving history and the heritage of the company. That just speaks volumes, that story right there around, purchasing a hotel and doing it for the community, that speaks volumes. So I think that's kind of helps set the stage for maybe why an archive and how that came about. But I wanted to take a step back and understand, like, how did you get into the outdoor industry? And we're kind of using a large umbrella term for outdoor, right?
Right.
To include a lot of different types of brands. But how did you find your way into the outdoor industry?
Well, I have a lot of passion for history. And so because of my passion for history, led me into the outdoor industry. And I've found that I should have known early on, because when I was a kid, I was a philatelist. I'm not actively anymore. And a lot of people are like, what? And it's a person who studies and collects stamps. And I loved I loved the art, and more importantly, I loved the history of what those images represented. And then I worked for the Visitors Bureau in Red Wing. I also worked for the local County History Center. And my background is actually in public relations, with an emphasis in political science. So I have a marketing background, and that's good because that's where the corporate archives is centered in the company organization, is within the marketing department. And when I joined Red Wing Shoe Company, the marketing team, they said, "Oh, by the way, we have a corporate archives." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And like every business archives, it was in the basement in the 90s. And we had an anniversary that was before I was there. And that's kind of where it started. It was our Jubilee, it was called. I really, really was passionate about preserving the history and also sharing it. So a lot of what I do is outreach within the nation and educating community on, we have an archives, this is what we do, this is what we collect, this is why it's relevant. This is why it's important to the business, especially with our portfolio of heritage brands, including Red Wing and Vasque. Vasque has a deep reputation. I talk to people and they're like, I remember wearing, these big clunky Vasque on college campus, and they have high expectations from the Vasque brand. And what we can speak to from the corporate archives is really, really important to validate that legacy brand.
It's very clear that you have a passion for this, and having worked in the Visitors Bureau too, like what is your connection to the city and that community in particular, which, Red Wing Shoe Company definitely seems like it's an institution in the community. What's your connection to the region?
Well, I went to college in this area, and where I chose to go to college is geographically, it's gorgeous because it has these bluffs and these rolling bluffs and, steep outcrops. And in the town I went to college, Winona, Minnesota, it has these two twin lakes. And that was very popular for students to go and do the walking path around the lakes. You can, rent equipment and go out on the lake. And that's where I had my canoe class. And it was very much an outdoor, a lot of people chose to go to school there because of the geographic region and the easy ability to step out the back door and get into nature. And it's interesting because that is one thing, it just made me think of this, but Vasque, that is what we're talking a lot about in the Vasque brand, is just open up your back door and walk out. And I think making the outdoors and accessible to everyone, and I know they have a great partnership with youth programs, and that's what, and you want to get behind something that makes a difference and is genuine. And I think that is really where my passion comes from, is that it's genuine. It's the real deal. Vasque started in, the early 60s by, W.D. Sweezy, and it's a great story of, what inspired him to start the Vasque brand. But of our family of brands in the Red Wing Shoe Company, Vasque is the newest by 90 years.
Wow.
So it's a relatively new, one of our family brands, but it's, and I grew up on a farm. I'm a farm kid. So outside was my playground. It was just natural for me.
That's great. Well, it seems like that combination of factors for you personally, it really culminates in doing this work at Red Wing Shoe Company. I'm curious to learn a little bit about the history of the archive itself. Like you said, Red Wing is a company that's been around for a long time. When did the company start?
Red Wing Shoe Company started in 1905.
1905.
However, yeah, the tannery started in the 1870s, and the hotel started in the 1870s as well.
Right.
And yeah.
Oh, so I bring that up because in the outdoor industry, people think of the outdoor industry as a relatively young industry. I guess they think of companies like Patagonia or Vasque, right, starting in the 60s. Like it seems like a lot of activity really started picking up in the 60s, 70s. Kind of coinciding with the environmental movement happening in the country, right? But there are outdoor brands in the country that have been around since the early 1900s, right? Like a Red Wing, and some others. So I think the work that you do is especially interesting because I think so many people value heritage. They value a brand that's been around, that has that reputation, has been around a long time. There's not many companies that can say they're over 100 years old, right? There's not that many companies that can say they're over 50 years old. And I think especially in the outdoor industry, that's of significant value. And to be able to talk about that and back up that history with with a history, artifacts, materials, to really hit that home for people, I think is especially significant. And so I'm curious from your perspective, when you came into the archives, what was the history of the collection? How long had it been around when you stepped in?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. We've had some forefathers that just had a natural interest in collection and preserving our history. So I would have to credit the start of, the bulk of the collection when I started was from the Sweezy family. So W.D. Sweezy, he started the Vasque brand, and W.D. Sweezy is the second of 4 generations of Sweezy foundation leaders at the company. And he was a pillar of the community. And you can see how Mr. Sweezy has touched so much in the community, and he had the passion for the outdoors. And it was interesting because I've talked to people who, and I apologize if I'm going on a tangent here, but I would talk to people who knew Mr. Sweezy, and they would say, he ran this big company, in Red Wing, the largest employer, and he would ride his bicycle around Red Wing. Granted, this is in the 60s and 70s, wearing his khaki pants and his polo, he'd ride his, bike, from his house on 7th Street downtown to his office, and he would take his family out on walks on Sundays, and he was the he was really the reason why we started our ELC in Red Wing. And he had become, he was a founding member of that organization, and Vasque and Red Wing Shoe Company continue to support the Environmental Learning Center today. And he saved catalogs, scrapbooks. A lot of the footwear that we have in our collection was donated by him or family members. And the collection was in the basement. Like I said, like every other business archive starts in the basement. And really the first thing that we needed to do was do preservation protection, because it was just there, not in a great environment, and it really needed a lot of preservation. So, and organization. So that was the state. But I could trace a lot of the collection at that point to what Mr. Sweezing and his family had saved. They knew it was important.
I guess when was a formal archive created within the company? Do you have any idea? It sounds like things were being gathered, but when was like a formal effort put in place to like put these objects in the basement, at least like set them aside, put them in a place where they could be at least protected in a way, maybe not to the degree that you wanted to get them protected, but when was that effort started?
Probably for our Jubilee anniversary in 95.
Okay. 95. It seems like it's typically around some kind of anniversary is when some of these collections are created. That that's common with at least W.L. Gore and Associates. That in that episode they mentioned for their 50th, they felt like it was time.
Mm-hmm.
And in a similar way, their founders had just been gathering materials and had these things. I don't know if it was necessarily with the intention to create something like this, but they knew that what they were doing was significant. It sounds like kind of a similar story here. It's like maybe it wasn't a conscious effort, but there was something that was that these materials needed to be kept around until a time like this when a formal collection could be created.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
And one of the interesting pieces in the collection when I started is for our 50th anniversary in 1955, the company did like an anniversary booklet. So they went back and got up photos. This is our founder, Charles Beckman. This in 1905. This is the plot of land in the city before the factory was built. This is what the town looked like. This is, the first employees. And then it just documented the history of the company for the first 50 years. And even better than that is that we had all of the correspondences. So the editor and the creator of this booklet, we had the correspondences when they talked, to the descendants.
Well, it's interesting. It seems like with a company like this, that's such an institution, like such an integral part of the city, of the community. I imagine you encounter this quite a bit. You're not only preserving, actively preserving the history of the company and the family that was a part of it. It seems like you're, by nature, you're helping preserve the history of the town and the region and the impact that the company had on the whole area.
Right. Right, because that matters. Um, our customers want to know that we're authentic. They want to know Red Wing is a real town. It's a real town where we live and work and raise our families and go hiking on the bluffs. You're absolutely right. That is important, and it's also something that we're actively doing as well. Um, it's mutually beneficial.
What was kind of the state of the collection when you came in? I know you mentioned that you know, the items were there in a basement, but the work that you were doing, or that you needed to do, was, you know, elevating the collection, making sure that
Yes.
those items could be preserved long term and protected. Um, Kind of what were some of your first steps coming in, inheriting this collection that was kind of a footnote of your job description?
Right. It was doing the basic in preservation in terms of identifying any items that had mold on it and taking them out and making sure that we isolated those items that might be damaging or impacting the rest of the collection. And also getting a better handle on the inventory of what we had. So there were some pieces that were not inventoried yet. So just going through those, we had lots and lots of duplicates. So so a lot of the content would come in from the advertising department, and it would just be stacks of the exact same thing. And space was a huge issue. So just combing through it, making sure that we didn't have an overabundance of one item, and also, doing a basic inventory, isolating any items like footwear that may have had organic material on it. As you can imagine, with the Vasque brand, not all the boots were perfectly clean when they were put downstairs. So just doing those basic things. And when I give presentations, I have a story about when I first started working in the corporate archives, and my most basic need was access. And I have this photo of the door on the outside of the archives in our basement that said, "Do not block this door," because people would be down in the basement and they would be, it was a huge basement, and I had one stall with a door on it. And there would be dollies in front of it. There would be carts. There would be, PVC pipes. There would be heating equipment. And literally getting access to the corporate archive space was one of my biggest challenges, because it was considered well, what do you need to be in there for, or what? It was just completely not on anybody's radar as something that needed constant care. It's like having, $1 million house, but not cutting the grass. I mean, you need to nurture and, care for the collection at, whatever stage it is. So my biggest hurdle was just literally getting in the door.
Wow. Yeah, and then getting all those items into a state where they could be, they wouldn't deteriorate, right? Like
Yes.
that's your greatest fear, right? Is these objects sitting in a room, where, mold can grow, and they're, that's the last thing that a historian archivist wants, is their
Right.
items in a compromised situation like that. So That sounds like a huge win to be able to make that adjustment. What does the space look like now? Like what types of facilities exist for the collection and to ensure that these materials, print materials and objects last for a long time?
Well, we have a good space now. It's a space that is not in the basement.
Hmm.
It is humidity control. It's locked and only accessible by select employees, including our maintenance team and myself and my assistant. And we have mobile shelving units in the space because it is fairly small. And we have, great, all the museum grade equipment that you need. Hopefully, in the future, we will be moving to an even better space because some of the items within our collection are so big that they don't fit on a shelf. They don't fit in a box. For example, we have a lot of equipment,
Hmm.
manufacturing equipment, and some of this equipment is on display. So in our corporate office, we have a lot of our artifacts on display, and we have storytelling opportunities for our history all throughout um, our office space. And we also have a museum in the Red Wing Shoes flagship store in Red Wing, Minnesota. And we also, one of my biggest pieces in the collection is a 1929 Model A that's on display in our lobby.
Oh, wow. What's the connection with that?
The truck was used to transport footwear from the warehouse down to the depot. And at the time, footwear was packaged in wooden crates. And then after the truck, wasn't needed anymore, that wasn't our, main way of transporting footwear and shipping footwear out. The truck was decommissioned and it was, picked up by a local individual. And that it changed hands a couple of times locally, and a local collector of everything Red Wing purchased it, restored it, and I got to know him even before I started working at the shoe company. And so he's a great guy. He's since passed away, but before he passed away, he said, "Claire, someday I want Red Wing Shoe Company to have this truck." So we acquired it from him, and now it's on display. It runs. It's in great running order.
Hmm.
I've driven it many times myself, and it's a really fun display piece. So some of those larger pieces, we've solved the problem of what to do with them by putting them on display.
That's great. Well, I imagine for you, well, I'd be curious for you, like from your perspective, it sounds like when you first came in, it was all about just getting the infrastructure in place so that the items that you already have can be protected. How much of your time now is spent looking for new items, and how much do you rely on individuals like this, like collectors who are out there on the hunt trying to find these materials and objects? How much do you rely on people like that to help preserve the history and maybe bring certain objects into the collection? I guess how much of your time now is out collecting or trying to bring new items into the collection?
Well, we're bringing in new items into the collection every day, and unfortunately, it's not as sexy as vintage vehicles
Hmm.
or vintage anything. What I'm bringing into the collection today is digital assets. About half of my time is dedicated for the corporate archives. And then I do have other responsibilities outside of the corporate archives, but most of what I'm going after now to collect is digital assets that we're creating every second of every day, trying to keep up with that.
Well, it sounds like you had a good foundation because of those founders and early individuals, parts of the company that had been preserving some of these early items. So you had a good infrastructure. Like, you didn't necessarily have to go out and hunt down certain objects, which is common among other archives that are unfortunately some of their collections have gone, or the company didn't do what it probably should have earlier on to preserve some of those items, and now they're have eBay alerts set for all sorts of different things, and they're trying to bring a lot of those objects back home. But you bring up a really interesting challenge that I don't know if has been completely addressed by a lot of other archives. And I think this is a cool opportunity to share maybe some of your best practices, but you bring up a good point around digital archiving. So much has moved to digital rather than print materials. It's relatively easy to take a catalog, right, and put that in the right environment where it can be preserved. And there's something to that, the tangibility of that object. Like, okay, we have the this catalog from this month, from this year, right? I feel like it's so much harder to do that with digital everything. What are the challenges that you've encountered with that? You mentioned some of it sounds like you've kind of built some, I guess, some best practices to preserve certain things, those newsletters and any significant milestone, a grand opening of a new location internationally, or whatever it might be. It sounds like you have some good best practices, but what are some of the challenges that you faced, and how do you decide what you preserve that's digital?
You answered your own question. There's so much digital asset materials that we're creating every day, across our family of brands. So deciding what's relevant for this brand, what is best telling the journey, of this brand. So for example, Vasque, it could be our partners, our people who are out on the trail and using our product. Their boots become an extension of their own identity. So they will use this product for a lifetime. And so that is really important. How do we capture that? 20 years ago, it could have been a handwritten letter and a photo. Today, that storytelling is much different, So going to those channels, working with those internal channel partners, and ensuring that we have that representation. And also, footwear is also really important too. When we reintroduce the Sundown, or when we reintroduce the Clarion, what was that marketing strategy? Why did we do that? What was the reaction within the marketplace? Do we have an example of that footwear? And why did we do that? So we have to make sure that we're looking at what is in the best interest of this particular brand.
Right. With that said, how is the collection used currently? That's a question that I'm interested in answering, and we've talked a little bit about a project I'm working on for that. But how do you see the collection is mostly used today? And I think it's interesting that you are within the marketing communications team. That seems like a common thread. I know some other companies, their archives are kind of attached with their special projects collaborations team. So every company kind of seems to do it a little differently, but in most cases, it seems like archives are attached to communications. I don't know if that's because communications uses them the most and marketing relies on those materials the most, but what departments do you see using the collection, and what for what purpose mostly?
Surprisingly, our agency partners. So when we have a new agency that joins the Vasque brand, I've had the pleasure of bringing them to the archives and letting them touch, the vintage catalogs, pulling, a Whitney too off the shelf and looking at it. And because it's a heritage brand, it's important that they understand who we are, who is Vasque. We're, we're not chasing trends. We're not, we're very authentic. And having, and it's important that our agencies who are representing our brands understand that. So that collaboration is a big user. Product development, our trade show and events. We did a huge historic exhibit for trade shows. Our marketing team, consumer relations is also a big user. So yeah.
I can't imagine that when you were collecting stamps, you ever thought that you would be working in this kind of capacity. Did you? Did you ever think
No.
that, or was that a dream, something that you had always aspired to, but maybe didn't think that that was possible?
I think that was the first sign I was a history nerd. But it's surprising that you can, when something is genuinely authentic and true. I don't know, how do I describe it? I never, I always, it was a dream of mine to promote something that I am passionate about. And I'm lucky that's what I get to do today. I never thought it was going to be footwear. But I always knew that I wanted to pursue be an advocate for what I'm passionate about. And I get to do that. I get to be an advocate for the corporate archives, the value that it brings to the brand. And I've come to love footwear. It was funny, I got a letter from a consumer, and she sent in her boots, and she wrote me this great letter about how she's used them, how long, been a customer for a long time, and these boots were like 20 years old, and the leather was, you know, y- you know, the leather was, the patina was beautiful. And I called her up and I said, I got your boots and I loved your letter. And I said, I love these boots. And she just laughed. And I said, if you're I might be the one person in this world that just appreciates the look of a well-worn boots, because it tells such a great story. It tells where they've traveled to, it's where they've hiked. Um, it, and it's, like I said before, it's, people's footwear are an extension of who they are. And so, and that's probably one of the favorite parts of the collection, is the consumer correspondences. And yeah, I'll never forget. Yeah, one particular consumer correspondence. We have one of my favorite pieces from the Vasque collection is a poster. We did a series of posters, World Walker, and this was many years ago, and it was the modern day Instagram. So we would take people's photos from where they've traveled all over the world, and we made posters. So this one poster is of a gentleman in front of his name is John, in front of a Budapest temple with the sundowners on. And we happened to put this particular poster up in our museum. And last year, I got a call from the store and said, well, I'm sending over somebody who says their picture is up in the museum. And I said, well, okay. I take a lot of strange calls. And so he comes by my office and I said, hi, I'm Claire, I'm the corporate archivist. And he said, you have my picture up. You have my picture up in your museum. I'm wearing my sundowners. And I said, oh yeah, in front of the Budapest temple in Nepal. And he's like, yeah, that was me. And he told me the whole story about how him and his wife, they spent a year for their honeymoon backpacking all over the world. And he was just so delightful, and he wouldn't stop raving about his Vasque boots that him and his wife bought for this backpacking trip around the world. And even more incredible than that is that he was wearing those boots. He was wearing those same boots. And he didn't know when he came to Red Wing, because he lived out of state. He was visiting Minneapolis. Red Wing is an hour south of Minneapolis, St. Paul. So when he came to Red Wing, he had no idea that he was in Vasque backdoor.
Wow.
And it just goes to show how, people they love their boots, and, they can't hardly part with them. I did try to approach the topic of him partying with them, but he was like, nope, they're still good. They're still good. And, so it was just really, really cute. I loved meeting him and hearing his story. And that's what makes a collection so wonderful, is not just the object itself, it's the story that goes with it. That's what I think is the holy grail of a collection, is having that story with the object. It just adds so much life and relevance and meaning.
Well, that's where I see such a huge opportunity for outdoor brands to take care of their history, take care of these objects, gather these user stories. I just think there's such an opportunity there, because in particular, outdoor product users seem to have this attachment to certain pieces of gear, and you've seen it with boots. To the point that a lot of outdoor users will repair, their jacket that has a tear in it, or, they'll do whatever it takes to keep some of these objects living longer and in use longer. And they see those things as battle scars, right? It's, this is from my trip to, wherever. And, it really becomes a part of their identity in a way. So that's where I just see there's such an opportunity to do this work and preserve these objects and preserve these stories, like you said, most of all. Not only for us to sit around talking about them, but for people within the company to reflect on the heritage and impact of the company, and people outside the industry to hear these stories and be impacted by them as well. It's in this work, and you've probably seen the same thing, it's so easy for these stories to just be lost or never be told, right? If it's not written down, or if it's not on a podcast online or put in a form where people can appreciate it, it's so easy for some of these stories and then the impact of the brand to be lost, right? And so that's why I see the work that you do and the work that I'm doing, the work that others in the industry are doing is so important, because there's so many of these stories that get lost, and if it's not for people like you who are out trying to save them and put them in a form where people can appreciate them, they could be lost forever.
And I think that is a really important part of the mission of our collection, our corporate archives, is if nobody knows we have it, how can we use it? So we really try to make things accessible. We've partnered with the marketing department on a dam, and to date we have, I'd say, well over 20,000 assets uploaded from our collection into the dam. And that's not even close to all of the assets that we have in our collection, but those are so having that that dam accessible to our product development, our social media team, marketing team, agency, it's self-serving. So I'm not the bottleneck anymore. They can go into the dam. We have documents are converted into OCR PDF, so they can search keywords, key product. They can search by dates. They can search by names. They can search by location. So that has been really, really important that's being able to put the assets and the search capability at every employee's fingertip.
Oh, that's great. That's something that we aspire to at some point with our collection is making more of it available online in a searchable format. That's kind of the holy grail for us, is having these materials be searchable, so brands and individuals and researchers can quickly find the information that they need from anywhere. Are there any objects or documents or anything in the collection that that's special to you, or any prized items? You mentioned the truck. You've mentioned a few things, but is there kind of a universally accepted, this is the item from the collection that's the most special?
They're all special children to me. They're all they all have they're all special for different reasons. But I think another really special piece of the collection is, I had mentioned W.D. Sweezy. Mr. Sweezy, when he went to Europe, he that's on one of his trips to Europe is where he became aware of people backpacking and hiking, and he thought, I bet this is going to take off in the US. And he had a passion for the outdoors, and he brought back that idea to Red Wing Shoe Company to develop the Vasque brand. And we have slides of photos that Mr. Sweezy took while he was on that trip to Europe. And it's just a window into the thought process, the idea that eventually became Vasque. And he was a great photographer. We have very few photos of Mr. Sweezy because he was always taking the photos, but he always took lots of photos when he went on trips. And to see those slides and know the story of where he got the idea to start an outdoor footwear company or a brand, and to have those slides in our collection there. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That is really special. We've touched on this kind of throughout our conversation, but kind of as a way to, I guess, kind of wrap up a little bit. But what is it about archives for you? I mean, it sounds like you've always had an interest and a passion. And I know you've kind of answered this question in a way, but what is it about archives that keeps you coming back and has helped make this like a fulfilling career for you?
I think it's fulfilling because I've really have had a lot of success in reaching out to our leadership team, our CMO, Dave Schneider. He's totally on board with the corporate archives and the power that we can provide to build brands. And it's energizing because I see people using it for the first time or figuring out how it's relevant to their work for the first time, and they're like, "This is so cool," and I'm like, "Yeah, it is really cool." Um, and being able to share that with people and see their excitement, um, you know, all over again, that really inspires me. And I'm like, and a lot of people have told me, "You've got the coolest job," and I'm like, "Yeah, I do.
Hmm.
I do got a pretty cool job." And to know that we've got the support from, you know, top down, um, is really rewarding. So the corporate archives is appreciated. It's valued. It's used. Um, and I and there's so much more that we're poised to do in the future, and that really keeps me excited. And I've been here for 20 years, and it's like, how do you stay there so long? And I'm like, well, because there's one more project. I mean, there's like, this is the best project we've ever done. You know, got to keep going. And then before that's over, there's another project that, they want to collaborate with the corporate archives on. And it just seems like there's always just one more awesome opportunity that, I can't possibly walk away from. Um, so as long as it stays challenging and rewarding, I'm all in.
That's great. Well, that leads me to kind of my last question for you. But what is the future of the collection? You mentioned that there's a bright future. There's a lot coming. Is there anything that you can share that excites you about maybe it doesn't have to be anything in particular, but what excites you about the future of the collection?
Um, I think what excites me about the future is our collaborations. So we're working on a museum exhibit at the hotel, and this is quite a bit of space that they're allowing us to talk about the community. So when we were talking about not only preserving our company history, brand history, but also the community too, we really had to take a look at what were those stories that we wanted to tell about the community, and how were we going to weave that into our brand stories as well. So those partnership collaborations, we've got just recently, the corporate archives and myself, we've been able to write, have a column I say a column, or just dedicated space in our employee newsletter that now is going out daily, but I presume that it'll maybe go to a weekly. But every Friday, there's, building our legacy message from the corporate archives. And that is huge. I'm getting in front of 2,000 employees, and how we can elevate that message is really important. That we have a corporate archives, how they can use it and how it's relevant to their work. So, like I said, there's always another exciting project to work on, challenge to accomplish. Hopefully, in the next few years, we're going to have a new space, and I'm excited to see to start working on that and make sure that is the best that it can be.
That's great. Well, Claire, thank you for taking the time. I guess just as a final wrap up, how's the best way to stay in touch with you and any, how can people interact with the collection? It sounds like the museum's probably the best way to do that during different circumstances. We're recording this during the COVID year 2020. So, but I imagine that's probably the best way for people to connect with the collection. How are other ways for people to engage with you and with your work?
Also follow our brands on social media. So you can follow, Vasque on the, major social channels, Red Wing Shoe Company, Red Wing Heritage. We have a lot of historic assets that are shared out on social media. So that's an excellent way. And yeah, and if anybody has, their pair of, sundowners or boots from their collection, we're always looking for great stories to go along with those boots, and so they can contact me directly, claire.pavelka@redwingshoes.com.
That's great. Well, Claire, thank you again. I appreciate the passion that you have for this work. It's contagious. Like I'm doing this on a less than part-time basis, and I just want to spend as much time as I can working on these projects because I share the same feelings. So
It's very rewarding.
it really is. So I appreciate you taking time to share a little bit about what you do and the impact of the collection. So thank you again.